Hi, so today I'm going to just take you through making the gauge swatch for Lakenham Mosaic Sampler. So it's there for you to be able to make sure that you're happy with the way your blanket's going to look and feel, especially if you haven't done mosaic crochet before, because obviously we are working. You can see these trebles have been worked over another row of stitches, so that is quite a thick fabric. And you'll just want to make sure that you're happy with how it feels. So this has sort of got a little bit of flexibility in it, but it's not too stiff, and how your stitches hook. So you can see I probably could have used a slightly smaller hook, but I'm kind of happy with it the way it feels too. Okay, I'll just show you the back as well. So for people who aren't used to mosaic crochet, overlay mosaic, what you'll get, wherever you can see on the front here we had a run of trebles, you do get these little sort of pockets on the back. That's perfectly normal. This is exactly how the back of overlay mosaic is meant to look. So it's stripy and you get the little pockets where you've had a run of trebles on the front. I like that. I think it's perfectly fine. I know some people don't like the little pockets, and there are various ways you can get rid of them, either by just like catching in the stitch there so it's still stripy but that's sort of held in place, or you can even get I think it's the negative stitch, which will give you like a reverse image on the back. I don't do any of those because the main reason being really they sort of slow me down, but also a lot of the techniques will actually sort of squash the pattern a little bit, so, and you'll need more yarn. So anyway, that's just to show you the back. Okay, so I'll be running through how to make this. I will just show you how to measure it though. Okay, so in the past, in some of my earlier patterns, I would have given the gauge as so many stitches to 10 centimeters, but I know that kind of confused some people, where if my gauge swatch wasn't wasn't that number of stitches wide. So now literally we are going to measure this swatch. Okay, so pick up your, oops, sorry, knocked the stand for my camera there. Pick up your ruler or tape measure and just drop it on there, and there we go. You can see, hopefully that is 9 centimeters wide, and hopefully it's 9 centimeters tall. Let's have a little look. Yeah, 9 centimeters tall as well. So it doesn't really matter if yours is a slightly different size. If you're happy with the way it looks and feels, just remember, if yours is a little bit bigger than mine, you are going to be using more yarn, so you may need to consider buying some extra yarn. That's the only thing to remember. Okay, so for this little swatch, I've just got two random colours of Starcraft Special DK here, because that's the yarn that I recommend for the pattern. But it doesn't really matter which colours you use. If you're using the colours that have a yarn pack, you should find that it doesn't matter which colours you use, so you don't have to use what I've called C1 or C2. You can actually use any two you like, as long as they've got a decent contrast. Okay, so you'll have plenty left. That shouldn't make any difference to the amount. I always leave enough left over that you should have plenty left anyway. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm not actually going to just do the single repeat, which the gauge swatch is written for. I'm actually going to show you, I'll just do two, so you can see how they work together if you wanted to extend it across the whole blanket. Okay, so the repeat for the gauge swatch for that pattern is 12 plus 5 stitches. So that means that you can do any multiple of 12 and then you add on 5. Okay, so the extra 5 are for the edge stitches, the edge chains, and then there's like a balancing stitch to make sure that the pattern is nice and balanced across the row. So I'll explain a bit more about that as we go along. What you will want to do though, although the repeat for this is 12 stitches, if you make sure you work to a repeat of multiples of 48 stitches plus the 5, then you'll be able to do, it will work for everything, all of the patterns within the Lakenham sampler, and indeed if you wanted to add any patterns from more or less any of my other mosaic designs. Okay, so that's why we've got a multiple of 48 plus 5 stitches for the pattern. Okay, so to start, pick out whichever colour you want for your background. Oh yeah, I'll just take you through the hooks first. You will see in the pattern that I recommend you use a 4mm hook. that is the size that Stylecraft recommend that you use with the special double knit. If you have a kind of average tension when you work, but of course we all crochet differently, and I've discovered over the years that I actually crochet a little bit looser than I used to, so I'm actually using a 3.75mm. The important thing to do is to use the hook that suits your style of crocheting with the yarn that you're using. And what you want to do is to get a fabric that has got a little bit of drape to it, so it's not too stiff, but it's also not too loose and sort of holy. Okay, so when I get started on my initial chain, I don't tend to use an actual slip knot. What I will do is just twist the yarn around like so, and then pull a chain through, but don't tighten that up. So if I now tightened up this first chain that I've just made, it would effectively become a slip knot. Okay, I like to leave that loose as a kind of bonus chain. It's not so much for the gauge swatch where your stitch count, you're much less likely to actually miscount, but if you've got like lots and lots of stitches to make a large blanket, it can just be useful to have that extra one just in case you need it, because you don't want to have to start all over again. Okay, so we're not counting that in our count for our chain. Okay, so what we're now going to do is, as I said, for the gauge swatch you need a multiple of 12 plus 5 stitches. Okay, so that's 17. 12 plus 5 is 17. If you're doing any more, that'll be like, I'm going to actually do 2 repeats, so it'll be 2 lots of 12 is 24, plus 5 is 29. Okay, so just work your row of chains like so, and once you've done your however many you want, 17 for just the gauge swatch, come back to me and we'll carry on. Okay, so I now have 29 stitches here, so that's my 2 times 12 plus the 5. Okay, now in the pattern for the gauge swatch I suggest that you fasten off here, and you can absolutely do that. The only reason I say to fasten off at the end of this row is just in case you wanted to use your little swatch as like a mug rug or something, and you didn't want to do a border. That way you would have like the fringe, the little loose end fringe at each end of absolutely every row. When it comes to making the actual blanket, I get you to do 1 extra chain as a turning chain, and we just carry straight on back. That'll all be hidden inside the border, so that won't matter. So it's entirely up to you. If you want to do a fringe, I recommend you fasten off now, and if not, then you can just carry on. So what I'm now going to do is add 1 more stitch. So if you don't want the fringe at either end and you're doing the gauge swatch, you can now do 18 chains. Okay, so then what we do, and we are working into a chain, I always recommend that rather than the foundation double crochets, for 2 reasons. Well, the main reason is basically we're going to be needing, for my border method, we work into chains down the left and right edges, and you need a chain on each end of every row, including this very bottom one, the foundation chain. Okay, so that's why I'm using a chain. And what we're now going to do, we're also going to be using these loops, both loops of this chain here, when we do our border. So at the bottom of your blanket you'll be working the front border into 1 chain, the back border at 1 loop of the chain, the back border into the other one. So what we now need to do for our blanket is actually twist that chain round and use these like bumps, the extra loops on the back of the chain. Okay, so that's what we're now going to be working into. So we're not working into this very first one because that's our turning chain that we've just created. So what we're going to do is we're going to start in that very next back bump with a double crochet. Okay, and a chain. So all the way through the blanket, we're going to start with a double crochet and a chain, and then you're going to miss the chain underneath the chain you've just made. So we're not working into this one. Okay, so now we're going to do a row of double crochets just into that back bump there. Okay, now one thing I probably should have said before you started the chain is, if you happen to know that you tend to make your chains quite tight, you may just want to use a slightly larger hook for literally just for the chains, okay? And then once you get to start this row here, switch back down to the one that you think you'll need for your blanket, okay? That just means that you will have a little bit more room to get your hook into this back bump, because some people do struggle, I know, to get their hooks into there. And it should also stop the bottom of your blanket bunching up. But if you know that your chains are, you know, reasonably similar to your normal stitches, then you just use the same hook throughout. Okay, so carry on like that. So if you're just doing the gauge swatch, once you've now done 13 double crochets into these back bumps, that should then take you to just that couple of chains left at the end. I'm going to do a little bit more because I'm obviously doing 2 repeats, but then when we get to that last couple of chains, come back to me and we'll carry on. Okay, so I now have 25 stitches after my initial chain, and if you're just doing the gauge swatch, you should now have 13. So that extra stitch is, you know, because I said we've got a multiple of 12 plus 5, remember? So one of those plus 5s is the balancing stitch, and all that is an extra stitch that I put just before we start the repeat. Work that in there just to make sure that the left and right edges of the blanket are a mirror image. It's just a balancing stitch, that's what I mean by that. And the other 4 of her plus 5 are our 2 edge chains and our 2 edge stitches. Okay, so once you've got to that point, you just now need to end, and every row will end the same. You end with a chain, skip the chain, and then work into your last, well, it's the last chain here. It'll be a double crochet on the next round. Okay, so that you can see I did get my stitch count right, because all I've got left now is this one loose chain, my sort of bonus chain. Now I'm not going to pull that tight yet. I'm just obviously I'm pretty confident I've got the right number of stitches on such a small sample, but as I was saying, if you're doing a large blanket, it's always worth just waiting until you've done the first pattern row to make sure that your stitch count was correct, because you may need to just do a little adjustment and you can work into that then. Okay, but in the meantime we're going to fasten off. So to fasten off, the easiest way to suggest is to basically pull a chain through there and then pull up. For the gauge swatch it doesn't need to be too much, but I would always recommend when you're doing your actual blanket to make it at least sort of 4 to 6 inches. The reason for that being, one, you're going to need enough yarn that you can easily tie ends together just to make them doubly secure before we do our border. And also 2, if you did need to make an adjustment because you'd missed a stitch somewhere, it's good to have a little bit of extra yarn just to be on the safe side. Okay, but I'm just going to cut off to about 4 inches there. Okay, so cut that off, pull the end out, tighten that up. So that is our row 1. Now when you come to do the actual blanket, I actually call this first row a foundation row. So it's in addition to the stitches in the charts. The reason for that being, it's just to give your pattern, the design, a little bit of space between sort of the the design and the border. For this one, if you are going to be starting with your gauge swatch pattern, you probably don't need it so much, because the first pattern row is only one tiny little stitch in every 12 that we're going to see, so you could probably get away with doing it without doing it. So that's why I'm now going to start straight away with my second colour, my contrast. But if you're following the pattern for the main blanket, then you'll see that I suggest you do one more row in your background colour. Okay, so now first thing we need to do is make sure we're working into the right side of our chain. So this is the right side, and you can tell that. You can see, if you just look at it there, you can see those top loops, and they're just slanted slightly towards you. So you know that's the right way round. If it was the other way round, you can see it. Can you see there? The stitches look completely different. You can't see these top loops at all. So make sure when you're looking at your row 1 or your foundation row, it looks like that. Okay, because now we're going to be starting again from the beginning. So this time I am going to work, well, my version of a slip knot. It's not a strict slip knot, but I find the easiest thing to do is start just like we did on our chain, where you wrap it around like so and pull a chain through, but I am now going to pull that tight. Okay, so that now effectively becomes a slip knot. Doesn't really matter how you do it, just make sure you have that knot on your hook to make sure that your first end's nice and secure. Okay, so we now pick this up and we're going to start every row after this first one now starts with a double crochet under both loops. You see there? Put my hook under both of those loops, and then being a standing stitch, you just work it straight into there. And then we have a chain, and we're going to skip this chain. Right, so now all we're going to do, we're now going to be working a nice simple row of double crochets, but can you see I'm only working into that back loop. It's really important to leave these front loops free because we use them when we're creating our pattern on the next rows. Okay, so carry along like so, working a double crochet into the back loop of every stitch right up until you get to that edge chain, and then I'll come back and take you through the next bit. Okay, I've now got up to this chain at the end of my row 2. So, and every row, I'm not going to show you the end of every row, but it's always going to be a chain, skip that chain underneath, and then you work your last stitch under both loops. So the first stitch and last stitch are under both loops. All the other stitches that you make will be made into either the back or the front, depending on the type of stitch you're making. Okay, and then fasten off. Cut that, pull it through. So far so simple. So now we're going to start to create our pattern, and by basically covering up most of the stitches we've just made on row 2. Okay, so we go back to our first colour again, start with our slip knot, and remember, double crochet under both loops and a chain. Now if you are getting confused by these chains, I know some people find it hard to see the initial chains, and or sometimes maybe work into them. So if you find that's confusing you, what you can do is actually grab a little marker, and now I've just made that chain. If you just pop a marker in that chain, then you'll know not to work into it when you do the next row. Okay, so that's just a little tip if you need to there. Okay, so now straight away on row 3 we start with a new stitch, which I call an F, and that's F for front loop treble, or front loop double crochet if you prefer US terms. Okay, so to do that, again, make sure we miss this first chain here. It's just a treble, but you're working there, so you're not working into the row you just did, you're working into the one below. Okay, and that is our balancing stitch. Okay, so we've got one front loop treble there, and now we start straight when the pattern repeat. So again, if you're doing the gauge swatch, you'll only do one repeat anyway. I'm going to do it twice, so we start with 5 more front loop trebles. Okay, and so a little tip, if you find that your stitches are pulling up and you get quite a big loop there, see I can stretch up to get it to do that, there's 2 tips. I mean, we all crochet slightly differently and have different tensions, and some will work stitches shorter and some longer. Try to sort of retrain yourself if you can, to keep your trebles sort of twice the height of your double crochets there. You see mine are. And also the very important thing is to keep these top loops nice and even, but not too big. So if you find that you're getting quite big loops on the top, that's a big part of how that can make that stretch up. So just if that happens, just slightly tension that first part of your stitch a bit more. Not so tight that it's all scrunched up and you can't get your hook in again, but just tension it a little bit more. And then when you work the rest of your stitch, don't pull it right down tight and make it too short. Just loosen that a bit maybe. And that should then give you nice, even, neat stitches. Okay? So I've got 2 more to do. 1, 2. Ooh. 2. Okay? So we had our balancing stitch and then 5 front loop trebles at the start of our first repeat there. Then we've got 1 back loop double crochet. So same stitch as we've done all along here. That's it. That's the only stitches you're really using. for standard overlay mosaic crochet. So where we need to make sure we're working that into the right place. So if you lay your sample, got a loose bit of nail there, lay your sample down, you should be able to see nice and flat. This would be the next front loop we'd be working into if we were doing our trebles, but so we need to go immediately above that. Okay, so in there. So that's our back loop double crochet, and then we have 6 front loop trebles. So for the gauge swatch, that will now take you up to your chain at the end of the row. For me, I will be in the middle of my little sample. Okay, 4, 5, 6. There we go. So that's our little pattern there. So the next repeat is now going to start again with 5 more front loop trebles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, and it's always, when you've done a run like that, it's always worth just double checking that you haven't sort of, I don't know, hypnotized yourself a bit and miscounted. So it's much easier to just check as you go along than to get to the end of the row and realize you've either not got enough stitches left or you've got some left over that you shouldn't have. So we'll just check. We should have 6 plus 5 stitches. Yeah, 6 at the end of the first repeat, 5 at the start of the next one, if obviously you're working across the row. So we'll just check we've got 11 stitches. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. Brilliant. Okay, so then we finish off with 1 back loop double crochet and 6 front loop trebles. So this is how we now check that we had the right number of stitches to begin with. 3, 4, 5, 6, and yep, that has now taken me nicely up to that last chain. Okay, you can see there's just that chain left over. So we end, as I said, 1 chain, skip the chain, and a double crochet under both loops, and fasten off. So now we know we've got the right number of stitches, we can pull our little bonus chain tight. Okay, so that is row 3. Row 4 is nice and straightforward. It's just like we did for row 2, where you've got your edge stitch chain and then a row of back loop double crochets. So you go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back and we will do row 5 together. Okay, so I have now just got started on row 5 with my edge stitch chain and 1 front loop treble, which is my balancing stitch before the repeat starts. Okay, so now we start our repeat very similar to row 3 really, but with 4 front loop trebles, 2, 3, 4, and then we've got 3 back loop double crochet. So you can see where that should be centered right over our little B stitch from 2 rows down. Okay, and then our repeat, or the gauge swatch if that's all you're doing, ends with 5 front loop trebles. 2, 3, 4, 5. Ooh, 5. So I am now going to carry on, do 1 more repeat, which is going to start with the 4 front loop trebles, and then we'll come back, if you come back at the end there, and we'll do row 6 together. Okay, so I've now just got started on row 6 with my edge stitch chain, and then we've got a back loop double crochet before we start our repeat. So that's our balancing stitch there. So for this one, we've now got 4 back loop double crochets, 2, 3, 4, and we're now going to create our little square here by working 1 front loop treble, 1 back loop double, and another front loop treble. Okay, so let's create a little square. Then our repeat ends with 5 back loop double crochets. So as I've said before, if you are doing just the gauge swatch, you will now be up to your chain at the end of the row, and I'll just carry on and do 1 more repeat. Okay, so I've now just got started on row 7 with edge stitch, chain, and our balancing stitch there. So the repeat here starts with 2 front loop trebles, 2, then we have 1 back loop double crochet and 1 front loop treble, okay, and 3 doubles, 1 treble, 1 double, and we're going to end with 3 front loop trebles. So for your gauge swatch, that will then take you to your final chain, and obviously I now just need to do 1 more, so I'm going to start with 2 more front loop trebles. Okay, so I think I've probably shown you everything you need to know now for the stitches, apart from in I think it's chart 6 in part 2, I've got a little adaptation of the overlay mosaic technique, where we are going to be using 3 colours. So we'll cycle through 3 colours instead of the 2 as we're doing here, just to create some extra, well, a third colour in there without needing to do any fiddly mid-row colour changing. So it's none of that, but so I will just come back and show you that. And then the border, for the border, I've already got a video for that. I actually decided to use the same border as I used on Flora's Fauna. So you'll find the pattern for that already on my YouTube channel. I just changed slightly how we change the colour, so that's the only difference really. So yeah, that's it for the rest of the videos. What I will do, I'll just carry on and complete this here, and I'll just come back and show you a little photo at the end of every sort of couple of rows, so you can see what it's meant to look like. But